What's up, everyone? Welcome back. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and relax because today we've got 40 minutes of the creepiest paranormal Reddit stories, while I play some Slime Rancher in the background. If you enjoy scary stories mixed with chill gameplay, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Now turn the lights off, maybe keep the door closed, and let's get into the first story. Something strange is happening with me. Hello, I'm a 20-year-old guy. Last June, I finally got a break from college and spent almost every day with my school friends. My best friend, Mike, is currently in military training, so we only get to see each other a few weeks every year. Watching how disciplined and hardworking he was inspired me to change my own life. I'm really into competitive programming, so on July 1st I deleted Instagram and Snapchat to focus completely on coding. At first it was difficult, but after a few days I felt free. My routine became almost obsessive. I'd code before work, during my internship, whenever I had free time, think about programming problems during lunch, compete in contests at night, and fall asleep thinking about algorithms. Then something strange started happening. One night I dreamed that I solved a problem I had been stuck on, and the next morning the solution actually worked. This happened again and again, until one day I suddenly broke down crying for no reason. A few nights later, I woke up feeling like someone was standing over my bed watching me. Nobody was there, but the feeling stayed. When I fell back asleep, I dreamed I was trying to leave my room, but every time I stepped through the door, I somehow ended up back inside. It felt like I was trapped in an endless loop, and every attempt increased a variable called ind until it reached 1053. I panicked, curled up on my bed crying, and called my mom and sister because I thought something had trapped me inside the house. They told me it was just a nightmare, but it felt completely real. Ever since that night, I haven't felt like the same person. My emotions swing wildly. I hear bells that aren't there, whispers with no source, and today I even heard what sounded like people arguing outside. I looked over my balcony and thought I saw several neighbors watching the fight, but when I texted a friend who lives nearby, she said nothing had happened. I still don't know whether I imagined everything or if something else was going on. That one was seriously creepy, but we're just getting started. Let's get into the next story. My boyfriend and I both heard my name being said, but we were completely alone. This literally just happened, and I'm still trying to process it. My boyfriend and I were standing in the kitchen, hugging in complete silence. We were completely alone in the house, with no TV, no music, nothing that could have made us mishear anything. Then, out of nowhere, we both heard someone calmly say my name. It wasn't loud and it wasn't a whisper either. It was just a quiet, clear voice. The part that scared me the most was that it sounded exactly like my sister. We both instantly pulled away from each other and looked around. I asked him, "Did you just hear that?" Without hesitation, he said yes. We'd both heard the exact same thing at the exact same moment. The problem was, my sister wasn't home. There wasn't anyone else in the house. We checked anyway, even though we already knew we'd find nothing. I've had moments before where I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, but I always blamed my imagination. This was different. Someone else heard it with me, which makes it impossible to explain away so easily. Ever since it happened, I've been trying to think of a logical explanation, but nothing really fits. If anyone has experienced something similar, I'd love to hear it, because whatever called my name that day definitely wasn't supposed to be there. That was definitely unsettling. Let's move on to the next story. My pet just passed away, and weird things are happening. A few weeks ago, my dog Cheddar passed away, and ever since then, some really strange things have been happening. Growing up, Cheddar was always my dog. He slept in my room, I took care of him, and we were inseparable. 2 years ago, I moved out, but I couldn't take him with me, so he stayed with my mom. I visited him all the time, and even though he was getting older, he was still the same loving dog. Sadly, after developing serious health problems, including a spinal condition, a painful tick bite, and a tumor the vets hadn't discovered until it was too late, we had no choice but to put him down. He was 14 years old, which is already twice the expected lifespan for his breed. The first strange thing happened the very next day. My mom was sitting in the living room where Cheddar's old dog bed still was. Our other dog, Biscuit, who never really got along with Cheddar, walked over to the bed and started pawing at it. Suddenly, both my mom and Biscuit heard a deep growl coming directly from Cheddar's bed. My mom said it sounded exactly like Cheddar. Biscuit immediately froze, his fur stood up, and he stared at the wall behind the bed. My mom checked every security camera around the property, but there was nothing outside, nobody else was home, and there wasn't anything that could have made that sound. Then I brought Cheddar's favorite beanbag and his collar back to my apartment. Ever since then, almost every night I've been hearing noises coming from my living room. It doesn't sound like the refrigerator or the wind. It sounds like something is moving around just outside my bedroom door. We have mouse traps set up from when we used to live in the countryside, but they've never gone off, so I don't think it's animals. The feeling has become so unsettling that some nights I'm honestly afraid to leave my room. Then my mom started experiencing something even stranger. She says the rest of the house is incredibly hot because her air conditioning only cools the bedroom, but lately she's been feeling freezing cold around her legs whenever she's in certain parts of the house. I honestly don't know what to think anymore. Part of me wants to believe it's just Cheddar letting us know he's still around. Another part of me worries that maybe he's upset we had to put him down, even though we only did what the vet recommended to end his suffering. Maybe we're just grieving, or maybe there's something else we can't explain. That was a heartbreaking one. Let's move on to the next story. Bad spirits or sleep paralysis, or both. I've dealt with sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember, but lately it's been happening more often than ever. I'm 25 now, and this latest episode happened just about an hour ago. It was around 3 a.m. when I found myself trapped between being asleep and awake. My boyfriend says I often talk during these episodes, sometimes saying things he can actually understand. This time I saw the same tall, dark figure I've seen before. It wasn't completely a shadow, but it was close. It had an unnaturally tall body and long, pointed fingers as it slowly walked toward my bed until it was standing directly over me. Usually I panic the moment I see it, but this time I felt something different. Anger, I looked at it and actually said, "It's you. I haven't seen you." I remembered that during a previous episode I had started praying, and whatever it was disappeared. I was just about to do the same thing again when my boyfriend woke me up before things got any worse. We both lay there in the dark trying to make sense of what had just happened. Then something strange caught our attention. My boyfriend reached for his phone, but it was completely dead even though it had plenty of battery before we went to sleep. It was a brand new phone, so that made even less sense. When it finally powered back on, the time read 3:18 a.m. That immediately made me think about all the stories surrounding the so-called witching hour. Curiosity got the better of me, so I started searching online for sleep paralysis experiences. That's when I came across something called the Old Hag. The moment I read those words, my stomach dropped. I'd seen her before. During another episode, I watched the silhouette of an old woman with long, messy hair standing over someone I thought was my boyfriend. She was holding a huge knife and suddenly started stabbing the body over and over again. Then, in one terrifying movement, she snapped her head toward me and rushed in my direction. At that exact moment, my boyfriend woke me because he heard me breathing heavily in my sleep. Reading about the old hag after already seeing something almost identical left me completely shaken. Lately, even outside of the sleep paralysis, strange things have been happening. My boyfriend has been waking up drenched in sweat almost every night, something that never used to happen. We both keep waking up between 3 and 4 in the morning, and we've even been having random relationship problems that seem to come out of nowhere. Maybe it's all just stress and sleep paralysis, or maybe there's something else going on that we can't explain. Either way, it's left me with more questions than answers. That one definitely leaves you wondering. Let's move on to the next story. I think a spirit was warning me. I almost feel embarrassed sharing this because nobody has ever believed me. Even now, years later, I still can't explain what happened. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, something started happening every single evening at almost exactly 7 p.m. out of nowhere. I'd hear the most horrifying scream I'd ever heard. It sounded like a woman screaming in absolute terror. It was so loud that my ears would actually ring afterward. This went on every night for weeks. The strangest part was that I was the only one who could hear it. My family never reacted. My brother would sometimes be in another part of the house and hear absolutely nothing while I was left frozen, wondering how that was even possible. I knew nobody was playing a prank on me. The scream felt far too real, and there was never anyone around who could have been making the sound. Eventually, my parents became convinced something was wrong with me and even started talking about taking me to see a doctor. Then one evening, I waited for the scream like I always did, but it never came. For the first time in weeks, there was only silence. The next morning, my family received devastating news. My uncle had taken his own life during the night. After that day, I never heard the scream again. To this day, I still wonder if it was all just some strange coincidence, or if something had been trying to warn me all along. That's a chilling story to think about. Let's move on to the next one. I physically felt myself walk through something in my hallway. There was nothing there. I've always been pretty skeptical when it comes to anything paranormal, which is exactly why this experience has stuck with me for so long. One night, around 11 p.m., I was home alone watching TV in my living room while my phone was charging nearby. My living room and dining room are connected, and a long hallway leads straight to my bedroom. Eventually, I turned off the TV, walked down the hallway with the light on, switched it off at the end, closed my bedroom door, and started getting ready for bed. Just as I was about to lie down, I realized I'd forgotten my phone charger in the living room. Since I know the house so well, I walked back through the hallway in complete darkness without thinking twice. Then, halfway down the hallway, I suddenly felt something brush across my entire body. The only way I can describe it is like walking straight into a huge spider web. It wasn't just an itch or my imagination. I physically felt something stretch across me, exactly like those giant webs you accidentally walk through outside. Instantly, goosebumps covered my body and I felt a cold chill run through me. I froze, reached for the light switch, and turned the hallway lights back on. I expected to see a massive web hanging there, but there was absolutely nothing. No spider, no web, nothing at all. The strangest part was that I had walked through that exact hallway less than a minute earlier and hadn't felt anything. I grabbed my charger with every light in the house on, hurried back to my bedroom, and somehow managed to fall asleep. I've walked through that same hallway in the dark countless times since then, and it's never happened again. I still can't explain what I felt that night. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation, or maybe I walked through something that simply wasn't supposed to be there. Sometimes the simplest experiences are the hardest to explain. Let's move on to the next story. Was my childhood friend's house haunted? When I was a teenager between 2011 and 2014, one of my closest friends lived in a house that neither of us could ever explain. She and her mom had just moved in, and at first everything seemed completely normal. Then one evening, after her mom left the house, we were hanging out in her room when we suddenly heard an unbelievably loud crash coming from the kitchen. It sounded like someone was throwing pots and pans everywhere and emptying every cupboard in the room. The noise was so violent that we completely froze. We didn't dare leave her bedroom for almost half an hour. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. Eventually, we convinced ourselves it must have been the neighbors or something outside, but it kept happening. Almost every time her mom left us home alone, we'd hear the same crashing sounds coming from the kitchen. Sometimes, after the noises stopped, we'd hear slow footsteps walking up and down the staircase. We were always too terrified to check. The strange part was that as soon as her mom came home, the noises would stop. Our parents insisted there had to be a logical explanation, and that our imaginations were making everything seem worse than it really was. My friend became so afraid of sleeping alone that I started spending the night at her house quite often. One night she woke me up, completely terrified, saying there was a little boy standing in the room staring at us. I never saw him because I had been asleep, but she described him in detail. She said he looked about 5 or 6 years old and was wearing a red onesie. On other nights, when I wasn't there, she told me strange lights of different shapes would appear across her bedroom ceiling. Even one of the elderly neighbors claimed to have seen the same lights, but our parents dismissed that too, saying the neighbor was old and probably mistaken. Years have passed, and I don't visit that house anymore, but every now and then I find myself thinking back to those nights. Maybe there really was a perfectly ordinary explanation for everything we experienced, or maybe there was something in that house that neither of us ever truly understood. Some memories stay with you no matter how much time passes. Let's move on to the next story. It made me believe in ghosts. I grew up in a tropical part of India where the summers were incredibly hot and humid. Until I left for college, I lived with my parents in a small 2-bedroom apartment. One of the bedrooms, the one I shared with my siblings, had a balcony overlooking a large tree. It looked pretty creepy at night, but I'd grown up playing around it, so it never really bothered me. During college, I tutored students in the evenings to earn some extra money. One particularly hot afternoon, I came home before work and decided to take a quick nap. I turned off the lights, left the windows and bedroom door open to let in some air, and lay down on the cool floor facing the wall. My mom was in her bedroom on the other side of the apartment, and I thought I was completely alone. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I suddenly felt someone lie down right beside me. At first, I assumed one of my siblings had come into the room. Then I felt an arm gently wrap around me, almost like someone was trying to comfort me. I was so sleepy that I didn't think much of it. A few moments later, my mom called my name, asking if I was leaving for tutoring soon. I rolled over. And there was no one there. The room was completely empty. I asked my mom if anyone else had come home, but she simply said, "No, it's just the two of us." I never told her what I'd experienced. A few months later, my parents installed an air conditioner in their bedroom because the summer heat had become unbearable. Since it was the coolest room in the apartment, the whole family slept there together one night. We locked the bedroom door before going to sleep, and the only light in the room was a faint green nightlight. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to my father switching on every light in the room and searching around the house. He said my mom thought someone had entered the apartment. We searched every room, but there was nobody there. The next morning, I asked my mom what she'd seen. She told me she'd woken up after hearing someone quietly crying. Sitting at the end of her bed, right beside where I had been sleeping on the floor, was what she thought was me. She asked what was wrong, but the crying suddenly stopped. The figure slowly stood up, and in the dim green light, she realized it wasn't me at all. She described it as a dark female figure with long hair hanging over her face. Without saying a word, it walked toward the bedroom door and disappeared into the living room. Thinking someone had broken into the apartment, she woke my dad, but they found nothing. Looking back, I can't help wondering if it was the same presence I felt lying beside me during that afternoon nap. It never seemed aggressive or tried to hurt us, but my mom would later say she occasionally heard the same quiet sobbing and sometimes sensed a woman standing in her bedroom. Eventually, she stopped reacting to it and simply learned to live with whatever she believed was sharing the apartment with us. That's another story that's hard to explain. Let's move on to the next one. I saw a ghost in 2007, wanted to share. Back in 2007, I was 22 years old and had just graduated from college. My mom and I had just moved into an old house that was already around 80 years old at the time. It was a large house with a small attic apartment at the very top. It was basically one big room with a bathroom, connected by a steep staircase. On our very first day there, I decided to hang out upstairs while my mom unpacked. After a while, I went downstairs to grab a snack. As I climbed the stairs back up, I noticed what looked like a pair of shoes standing near the window on the far side of the room. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I reached the top of the stairs, I realized they weren't just shoes. There was a person standing there, completely still, staring out the window. I froze. Then the figure slowly turned around, and it was me, or at least it looked exactly like me. I don't think I've ever been that terrified in my life. I'm pretty sure I screamed. But as soon as our eyes met, something even stranger happened. It wasn't like the figure spoke to me, but somehow I instantly understood a message. It felt as if something had communicated directly into my mind, telling me that we were welcome in the house. The next morning, I started telling my mom what had happened, but before I could even finish, she interrupted me and said, "If you saw a ghost, we're moving." The whole move had already been incredibly stressful for her, so I kept the rest of the story to myself. I ended up living in that house on and off for the next 5 years, and I never saw the figure again. Whether it was my imagination, a strange hallucination, or something far more mysterious, I still have no explanation for seeing someone who looked exactly like me standing in that attic on the very first day we moved in. Sometimes the strangest experiences happen only once, and that's all it takes to remember them forever. Let's move on to the next story. A childhood experience in rural China that I still can't explain. I grew up in a rural village in China, and when I was about 6 years old, something happened that I've never been able to explain. One hot summer afternoon, my parents were exhausted after working in the fields, so they told me to walk by myself to my grandfather's house for lunch. It wasn't far, and back then that was completely normal. On the way, I suddenly needed to use the bathroom. There was a large dirt pit beside the road, so I squatted down there like any little kid would. While I was peeing, I happened to look up and froze. Just a few feet away from me, at almost eye level, was what looked like a snake hole. Inside, it was a massive black snake with strange patterns along its body, staring directly at me. Its eyes were incredibly bright, and it didn't move an inch. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but I was too scared to move because I thought if I did, the snake would lunge out of the hole and chase me. It felt like forever before I finally finished, pulled up my pants, and sprinted away without looking back. When I reached my grandfather's house, I told him everything and begged him to come catch the snake. In our area, people sometimes use snakes to make traditional medicinal alcohol, so I thought he'd be interested. At first he laughed and didn't believe me, but after I kept insisting, he grabbed a hoe and followed me back to the spot. When we got there, the snake was gone, but what shocked me even more was that the hole had completely disappeared too. I knew I had been looking directly at it only minutes earlier. My grandfather joked that I'd imagined the whole thing, but I asked him to dig where I said the hole had been. All he found were thick tree roots beneath the dirt. As a child, I convinced myself the snake must have escaped toward the nearby river somehow. But years later, one question still bothers me. If the snake simply slithered away, where did the hole go? To this day, I still don't have an answer. Some mysteries never seem to leave you. Let's move on to the next story. We woke up some spirits at my grandma's house. About 5 months ago, my cousin and I were helping our grandma with some yard work. He knew I'd always been interested in paranormal investigations, and since I owned an EMF meter and a spirit box, he asked me to bring them over after we finished. We didn't really expect anything to happen. We were mostly just curious. Once we were done outside, we went into the living room and decided to try the spirit box. My cousin wore headphones while I asked the questions so he couldn't accidentally guess or influence the answers. The conversation started off simple. I asked, "How many of you are here?" And he immediately replied that he heard, "A lot." I asked, "Is anyone here with us?" The answer was, "Go away." Then I asked, "How old are you?" The response was simply, "Old." When I asked for a name, my cousin looked at me and repeated our deceased grandfather's last name. That alone was enough to make us uncomfortable. Finally, I asked if anyone else was there, and instead of words, he heard what sounded like a little girl laughing. At that point, we decided we'd had enough and switched to the EMF meter. That's when things became even stranger. Everywhere my grandmother walked, the EMF meter would suddenly spike to level 4 or even 5. It didn't matter which room she entered. As soon as she walked through the doorway, the meter would jump. The moment she left, the readings disappeared completely. We tested everything we could think of. She wasn't carrying a phone, there weren't any unusual electrical devices nearby, and we even checked for wiring inside the walls. Nothing explained why it only happened around her. About a month later, a man who claimed to have briefly died before being resuscitated came to our town to speak about spirits and the paranormal. According to him, ever since his near-death experience, he had been able to sense things most people couldn't. My cousin decided to ask him about my grandmother's house without mentioning anything about the spirit box session. Before my cousin could tell him any details, the man said there were 2 spirits inside the house, a man and a little girl. He even claimed he couldn't help them unless he spoke directly with my grandmother. Hearing that gave us chills because it matched exactly what we'd heard through the spirit box. Then he said something even stranger. He claimed the man wasn't our grandfather at all, but someone who had taken his own life years ago by hanging himself from the lone tree at the very end of my grandmother's garden. There really is only one tree standing there. We had never told him that. At first, we didn't know what to believe, but then things started happening to my grandmother herself. She began saying she could see people sitting in the living room, talking to her as if they were really there. At first, she ignored them, but recently she claimed she saw a man who actually attacked her. She insisted she fought with him in the living room before he disappeared. The strange thing is that outside of these experiences, she's perfectly healthy. She still gardens every day, cooks, jokes with the family, and carries on normal conversations. She even tells us she knows the people she sees aren't supposed to be real. She has no history of mental illness, and we've never told her about using the spirit box or the EMF meter that day. When my cousin spoke to that same man again, he claimed we'd disturbed something by trying to communicate with it, and that whatever we had awakened was now attached to the house. He also said there was nothing he could do to stop it. Whether everything is just an unbelievable coincidence or something we accidentally invited into my grandmother's home, I honestly don't know. But looking back at everything that's happened, it's hard not to wonder if that afternoon with the spirit box changed something we never should have touched. That's definitely one to think about. Let's move on to the next story. Visitor while I was away. Last week, my family and I left town to visit relatives for a few days. Before leaving, I did what I always do whenever the house is going to be empty. I made sure every security camera was working, set up a few extra cameras in the bedrooms facing the windows, and unplugged every unnecessary appliance before locking up. I like knowing every possible entrance to the house is covered while we're away. It's pretty normal for my cameras to detect movement outside at night. Usually it's just a cat, a rabbit, or some other animal wandering through the yard, so I always check the recordings just to be safe. But last Thursday, at exactly 10:46 p.m., I received a motion alert from the playroom inside the house. That immediately caught my attention because nobody was supposed to be there. When I opened the recording, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The room was completely empty, but the television suddenly switched on by itself. There was no one in the room and nothing appeared to touch it. About 10 minutes later, another motion alert came through. This time, the TV turned itself back off. Then, just 6 minutes after that, another notification appeared. The television switched itself on again. And this time it stayed on. About an hour later, I received another alert, this time from the kitchen camera. The footage showed what looked like either an orb or maybe a piece of dust moving in a perfectly straight line from the hallway into the kitchen. As it moved closer to the camera, the static and background noise on the recording grew noticeably louder before it disappeared out of view. At first, I tried to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe there had been a power surge while we were gone. After all, thunderstorms aren't unusual where I live. But when we got home, none of the clocks had reset, and none of the appliances showed any signs of losing power. I even asked my neighbors if there had been any storms or outages while we were away. They all said no. Then there was something else. The back of the house where the playroom is located had a strong musty smell that hadn't been there before we left. The house itself is about 125 years old and has had a long history. Over the decades, it's been a restaurant, a doctor's office, a hot dog stand, a construction company office, and even a rental property. There have always been parts of the house that felt different. My dog refuses to enter three specific rooms: the laundry room, my father's bedroom, and the utility room. No matter what, he simply won't go inside them. Then there's my 9-year-old son. Every now and then he'll casually mention someone he calls the war doctor. According to him, the war doctor sometimes stands in his bedroom and keeps the monsters that live in the laundry room and utility room away. We've never told him any ghost stories about the house, and he talks about it as if it's completely normal. Maybe the TV turning on by itself was just some strange electrical malfunction, and maybe everything else is nothing more than coincidence. But with everything that's happened inside that old house over the years, I honestly don't know what to think anymore. Some houses seem to collect more than just history. Let's move on to the next story. Realistic dream or something sinister. I've shared paranormal experiences before, but this is the one I've never been able to explain. Ever since I was a kid, strange things seem to follow me. My family and I lived in an apartment in Buena Park, California, where I constantly experienced terrifying nightmares and unexplained events. After we moved away, things became quieter for a while, although the nightmares never stopped. Eventually, we settled in Compton, California, and that's when everything seemed to start again. One afternoon while cleaning my room, I found a pair of Monopoly dice. For some reason, I decided to use them to try communicating with whatever I believed had been following me. Looking back, I know it sounds ridiculous, but at the time I was convinced something was there. I don't remember every question I asked, but I clearly remember the answers. Whatever I was communicating with claimed it was evil, and that it had been with me my entire life. Hearing that terrified me. I remember crying because, for the first time, I felt like this wasn't just my imagination anymore. A few weeks later, on July 3rd, 2012, something happened that still haunts me. It was the middle of the day, bright outside, and I was lying on my bed watching TV wearing nothing but my boxers. Suddenly, everything around me looked exactly the same, except the TV screen was black. I still had the remote in my hand. My room looked identical. It felt like I had somehow slipped into another version of reality without ever leaving my bed. As I tried turning the TV back on, a small red creature suddenly appeared out of nowhere. It couldn't have been more than 4.5 feet tall. It grabbed my wrist so tightly I couldn't move, and at that exact moment my mouth was forced wide open. I couldn't close it no matter how hard I tried. It felt like something enormous was being pushed down my throat, sending intense pain through my entire body. Then the creature climbed on top of me. Its mouth opened impossibly wide as if it was about to vomit into mine, but it never did. The thing I'll never forget were its eyes. They weren't eyes at all, just deep black holes staring directly into me. On its forehead was what looked like some kind of strange symbol I could never identify. The entire encounter lasted what felt like over a minute. Then, just as suddenly as it began, I woke up, except I wasn't in a different position. I was lying exactly where I'd been before, still holding the remote, still wearing the same clothes, and my mouth was still hanging open. The pain throughout my body hadn't disappeared either. It took me a long time to even process what had happened. For years I tried to forget about it because thinking about it scared me too much. Oddly enough, after that day, whatever had been tormenting me simply stopped. I never experienced anything like it again. Years later, when I was 16, both of my parents told me they'd had encounters with what they believed was the same entity. Hearing that made me question everything all over again. Was it just a terrifying dream, a vivid case of sleep paralysis, or was it something far darker that somehow affected my entire family? After all these years, I still don't have an answer, and maybe I never will. Whether it happened in my mind or in reality, it's something I'll never forget. That story is definitely hard to shake. Let's move on to the next one. I might have a ghost roommate. About 2 years ago, my family moved into a new apartment, and at first everything seemed completely normal. Then one night around 2 in the morning, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone. My bedroom door was closed, not locked, but definitely shut. Out of nowhere, it slowly creaked open by itself. It startled me, but I convinced myself I probably hadn't closed it properly. Then it happened again, and again. At first it only happened late at night, but eventually it started happening during the day too. I began checking the door every single time I closed it, even pulling on the handle to make sure it was latched. No matter how careful I was, it still kept opening on its own. Eventually, I stopped paying much attention to it, but then stranger things started happening. Whenever I was home alone, I'd hear someone trying to unlock the front door. It sounded exactly like someone inserting a key and turning the lock. Every time I'd rush over and look through the peephole, nobody was there. Sometimes I'd stand there listening as the rattling continued while staring at an empty hallway outside. It got so unsettling that whenever I was alone, I'd lock myself inside my bedroom. At first I wondered if it was all in my head until my best friend heard it too. We were on a phone call when the sound happened again. She clearly heard someone trying to unlock the front door. I checked immediately. Nothing. On another call, we both heard what sounded like the front door opening, followed by footsteps moving through the apartment. I searched every room, but there wasn't a single person inside. I tried telling my parents, but they brushed it off and said I was imagining things, so eventually I stopped bringing it up. One day, while I was changing clothes, my bedroom door slowly opened again. I'd finally had enough. I yelled, "Whoever you are, don't open the door while I'm changing. Please leave me alone." Oddly enough, after that, the door stopped opening at inconvenient times. Then something else began. One day my watch disappeared. I knew exactly where I'd left it, but no matter how hard I searched, it was gone. Frustrated, I jokingly said out loud, "Whoever you are, please give me my watch back." That same night, I found it underneath my bed. The strange part was I'd already looked there several times, and it was sitting in a place where it couldn't have simply rolled or fallen. It looked like someone had deliberately placed it there. After that, it became a pattern. Things would disappear, I'd ask for them back, and sooner or later they'd mysteriously return. Then there were the nights when I was crying. Once, while I was incredibly stressed and sitting alone in my room, I suddenly heard knocking coming from the ceiling. I live in an apartment, so neighbors live above me, but it was the middle of the night when everyone should have been asleep. Every time I cried, the knocking continued. Whenever I calmed down, it stopped. After a painful breakup, I spent weeks crying almost every night. During one of my worst breakdowns, I suddenly felt what seemed like a hand gently rubbing my back. The feeling was so real that I instantly stopped crying, almost as if all the sadness had disappeared for a moment. I even remember having a dream where something quietly patted my back to comfort me. Looking back over the last 2 years, I honestly don't know what to believe. If there really is something sharing this apartment with me, it doesn't seem violent or malicious. It plays little tricks, moves my things, opens doors, and somehow always seems to know when I'm upset. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation for all of it, but sometimes it feels like I have a roommate that I simply can't see. Whether that's comforting or terrifying, I still haven't decided. Sometimes the unexplained isn't always frightening. Let's move on to the next story. I still don't know what I saw outside my bedroom window. This happened just a few days ago in July, and I still can't stop thinking about it. I sleep alone in a room at the back corner of my house, and just beyond my bedroom wall is a church prayer ground. Every Sunday, people gather there, and over the years I've seen some unsettling things. I've watched people scream, refuse to enter the prayer ground, or even try climbing over the boundary wall. Whether they were genuinely possessed or simply acting, I honestly don't know, but I've seen it with my own eyes more than once. A few nights ago, during a heavy rainstorm, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. I always leave a dim green nightlight on, so the room wasn't completely dark. Sometime around 2:30 in the morning, I heard what sounded like someone whispering just outside my room. The rain made it difficult to make out the words, so I ignored it at first. A few seconds later, I heard it again. Curious, I got out of bed and pressed my ear against the wall that faces the church grounds. It sounded like someone quietly repeating, "Mudgiana High." Mudgiana High, which translates to, "I want to come in." I wasn't completely sure that's what I heard, so I tried convincing myself it was just the wind and went back to bed. A few minutes later, something made me suddenly open my eyes. I looked toward the small window near the top of my room. It was open, protected by iron bars and a mosquito net. That's when I saw them. 2 bright, glowing eyes staring directly at me through the window. For a brief moment, it even looked like whatever was out there was smiling. Panic hit me instantly. I jumped out of bed, slammed the window shut, and switched off the green nightlight because I suddenly had the terrifying feeling that whatever was outside could see me. I remember checking the time. It was 2:28 a.m. I sat down in a chair, trying to calm myself, when a loud scratching sound suddenly came from the window. It sounded as if something was clawing at the mosquito net, trying to tear its way inside. I completely froze. After a few moments, I decided I couldn't stay in the room anymore. I walked toward the door to sleep in my brother's room instead. But just before leaving, I glanced up at the small ventilation opening near the ceiling. And for a split second, I saw those same glowing eyes staring back at me. Then they vanished. At that moment, I was convinced something had entered my room. I ran out without looking back and spent the rest of the night sleeping beside my brother. Since that night, I've gone back to sleeping in my own room, but it has never felt the same. The whispers haven't returned, and I haven't seen the eyes again, but every morning I wake up feeling strangely exhausted, like I never truly rested. Maybe there was a logical explanation for everything that happened that night, or maybe something standing outside that window really was asking to be let in. That's one experience I wouldn't want to relive. Let's move on to the next story. Does anyone know what this creature was? Alright, we're almost at the end of tonight's video. This is our second to last story, so let's dive right in. A few years ago, I started having a series of nightmares that I've never been able to forget. Even now, I can remember every detail as if they happened yesterday. The strange thing was that the same creature kept appearing over and over again. It had 4 unnaturally long legs and a face that didn't even look human. Most of the time, it never attacked me. It would simply stand in the background of otherwise normal dreams, watching me from a distance while I spent time with friends or family. It never spoke. It never chased me. It just stared, before eventually disappearing. That continued for months until one night everything changed. The dream began completely normally. I was about to go shopping with my friends to buy a new keyboard, but I realized I'd forgotten my wallet, so I headed back home to grab it. The moment I stepped inside my house, I instantly knew something wasn't right. The entire place felt wrong, like I was being watched. I spoke to my mom, picked up my wallet, and headed back toward the front door. That's when my cat suddenly walked inside. At first, nothing seemed unusual, until it stood up on its back legs like a person. After a few seconds, it dropped back onto all fours as if nothing had happened. I completely panicked. I ran toward my bedroom, but no matter where I looked, that same creature kept appearing. It would hide around corners, peek through doorways, and somehow always stay just out of reach. Every time I tried leaving the house, something blocked my path. Then my mom went to take a shower, leaving me completely alone with whatever was stalking me. The creature started transforming into familiar objects and people, making it impossible to know what was real anymore. Terrified, I locked myself inside my parents' bedroom and started screaming at it to leave me alone. Eventually, everything went quiet. I slowly opened the bedroom door and froze. The entire living room was covered in blood. The creature was gone, but the house looked like something horrific had happened. That's when I woke up. I was crying uncontrollably and having a full panic attack. I ran to my mom, and she hugged me, telling me over and over that it was only a nightmare. Looking back, one detail has always bothered me. Around that time in my life, I had been experimenting with rituals and prayers directed toward the devil out of curiosity. I don't know if that's connected or if my own fears simply found their way into my dreams. Whatever that creature was, it never physically harmed me. Instead, it seemed to enjoy doing one thing: watching me, following me, and feeding off my fear until I finally woke up. Even years later, I still wonder whether it was nothing more than recurring nightmares, or if something else was visiting me while I slept. We've made it to the final story of the night. Let's see how this one ends. My imaginary friend as a child, was she actually imaginary? For as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by the paranormal, stories about spirits, and the idea that children might be able to see things adults simply can't. Over the past few months, I've been reading about past life regression and all kinds of unexplained experiences, and it reminded me of something that happened when I was very young. I was only 3 or 4 years old, but it's one of the clearest memories I have from my childhood. Like many kids, I had what everyone assumed was an imaginary friend. Her name was Polly. The difference is that Polly never felt imaginary to me. She felt like a real person who just happened to be there whenever I was at home. I don't remember exactly what we talked about because it was so long ago, but I remember talking to her almost every day. She wasn't someone who would suddenly appear or disappear. In my memories, she was simply there. My parents would occasionally catch me having full conversations with her, although I'd have to ask them for the exact details because I was so young. What has always fascinated me is how vividly I remember what she looked like. Even after all these years, I could probably recognize her if I saw her in an old photograph. Polly looked like she belonged to a completely different era. She had dark brown hair styled in a large beehive, bright red lipstick that always stood out, a classic polka dot dress, shiny red high heels that perfectly matched her lipstick, and she was always chewing gum. That's one of the details that has never left my mind. I can still picture her smiling while chewing gum as if it were yesterday. Looking back now, I can't understand how a 3-year-old could create such a detailed image of someone from the 1940s or 1950s. At that age, I wasn't watching old movies or learning about fashion from decades before I was born. I spent my days watching children's shows like Barney and playing with toys. Nothing in my world looked anything like Polly. That's what makes the memory so difficult to dismiss. She wasn't some colorful cartoon character or made-up princess. She looked like an ordinary woman from another generation. I don't remember ever being afraid of her. If anything, I remember feeling completely comfortable around her. She never threatened me or tried to scare me. She simply kept me company. As I grew older, though, she slowly disappeared from my life without me ever noticing exactly when it happened. One day she was simply gone, and I never saw her again. For years, I never questioned it because everyone told me she had just been an imaginary friend. But after reading so many stories about children who claim to see spirits, deceased relatives, or people no one else can see, I can't help wondering if Polly was really just a product of my imagination. Some people believe young children are more sensitive to things adults can no longer perceive. Others believe imaginary friends are simply a normal part of childhood development. Both explanations make sense, yet neither one completely satisfies me. The image of Polly has remained unbelievably clear for over 30 years, while I've forgotten countless real memories from that same period of my life. That's the part I can't explain. Maybe she was nothing more than a child's imagination filling in the gaps. Or maybe, just maybe, Polly was someone who had lived long before I was born and somehow crossed paths with me when I was too young to question it. I don't know if I'll ever find the answer, but it's a memory that stayed with me my entire life, and I still find myself wondering who, or what, Polly really was. And with that, we've reached the end of tonight's video. If you enjoyed these paranormal Reddit stories while relaxing with some Slime Rancher gameplay, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps support the channel. Let me know down in the comments which story creeped you out the most, or if you've ever experienced something you still can't explain. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe, sleep well, and don't let the stories follow you to bed.